In the first 4 months of 2026, 76 cents of every dollar stolen from the global cryptocurrency market went to one country. With 25 million people, state-controlled internet, and a nuclear weapons program that's been sanctioned by the United Nations since 2006. And the number gets stranger the longer you look at it. In 2022, North Korea was responsible for 22% of global crypto theft. In 2023, that share climbed to 37%. By 2025, it was 64%. By early 2026, it was 76%. In 2025 alone, North Korean state-sponsored hackers stole $2.02 billion. That's 7.5% of the country's entire GDP, taken from digital wallets across the world in a single year. For context, the cumulative total since 2017 is now past $6.75 billion. That figure equals 25% of North Korea's current GDP. The natural assumption is that this is a crime story, that it's about unusually sophisticated hackers running elaborate schemes. But that framing doesn't actually explain anything. It doesn't tell you why it's North Korea specifically, and not Russia, China, or Iran, all of which have significant state-linked hacking operations. It doesn't explain why the numbers compound year over year despite unprecedented global awareness of the threat. It doesn't explain why a nation with no civilian internet access and an economy roughly the size of Vermont's controls the majority of the world's most technically demanding financial crime. To understand what's actually happening here, you have to stop looking at the hackers and start looking at the math. North Korea's formal economy is worth roughly $26.9 billion. That's a small number, but the relevant figure isn't the GDP, it's the constraint.
Since 2006, a progressive sequence of UN Security Council resolutions, US Treasury designations, EU sanctions packages, and South Korean trade restrictions have methodically closed every legal channel through which the regime could earn foreign currency. The critical blow came in 2017. The US Treasury sanctioned North Korea's access to SWIFT, the messaging network that settles virtually every international bank transfer on Earth. In the same year, new sanctions packages blocked roughly 99% of the country's formal exports. The regime now faces a structural problem that has nothing to do with ethics and everything to do with arithmetic. Foreign currency isn't a luxury for Pyongyang. It's the operating budget for the regime's existence. Loyalty payments to senior military officials, hard goods that can't be produced domestically, and most critically, the weapons programs, ballistic missiles and nuclear warheads that provide the only geopolitical leverage capable of deterring military intervention. Without a continuous supply of foreign currency, the system that keeps the Kim government in power begins to fail. With legal channels closed, Pyongyang went looking for alternatives, and around 2017, it found one. Cryptocurrency, at its architectural core, does not use banks. There is no SWIFT network, no correspondent banking, no compliance officer capable of flagging a sanctioned counterparty. A Bitcoin transfer between two wallets is validated by a decentralized network of computers. The sender can be anonymous, the destination can be anonymous. Settlement takes minutes, and no single institution can freeze or reverse the transaction. For a government that has been cut off from every traditional financial rail, this is not merely convenient, it is structurally transformative. The entire sanctions architecture, built over decades on the assumption that controlling banking access means controlling money movement, does not apply. But accessing crypto at scale requires a target. And this is where the second actor in the system enters. The DeFi and Web3 sector operates on a single governing metric, total value locked, or TVL. The more assets locked in a protocol, the more users trust it. The more trading fees it generates, the higher its token valuation climbs. TVL is credibility, and credibility compounds quickly.
This creates an intensely competitive race to accumulate TVL before anyone else does. Run the economics. A protocol that spends 2 years on security audits loses market share permanently to a competitor that launched in 6 months. First mover advantage in DeFi is worth $50 to $100 million per year in fees at peak. The expected cost of a major exploit, calculated as probability multiplied by average loss, is roughly $30 million for a fast deployed protocol. The expected value of fast deployment, even after that risk, is still positive. Fast deployment wins the math. Slow deployment loses the market. The result is an industry that, by rational collective decision-making, maintains chronic underinvestment in security. Protocols holding $200 to $500 million in assets are audited once. Governance is minimal, and development environments are not isolated from signing infrastructure. Not out of negligence, out of competitive pressure.
North Korea did not create this vulnerability. Market dynamics did. Lazarus Group, the regime's primary hacking operation, active since at least 2009, simply learned to find it systematically. On February 21st, 2025, at 13:30 UTC, Bybit initiated a routine transfer from its Ethereum cold wallet. 17 days earlier, on February 4th, a developer working on Bybit's infrastructure had downloaded a software package from GitHub. The package was hosted in a repository with legitimate-looking code. It contained a malicious payload. Over the following 17 days, while the malware established persistence on the developer's laptop, attackers used that access to reach Bybit's multi-signature wallet infrastructure, the safe wallet system that controlled how outbound transactions were reviewed and signed. When the routine transfer was initiated at 13:30 UTC, the destination address in the transaction payload had already been quietly replaced. Bybit's system believed it was sending funds to its own warm wallet. It was sending them to North Korea. 401,000 ETH, $1.46 to $1.5 billion, gone. In the 90 minutes that followed, those funds were distributed across 6,954 distinct wallets. Within hours, 83% had been converted to Bitcoin. Within 2 weeks, more than $300 million had passed through bridges, decentralized exchanges, and mixing protocols, and become, in the language of blockchain forensics, irretrievable. One developer, one malicious file, the largest single cryptocurrency theft in history. The specific failure at Bybit, no hardware isolation between the development environment and the signing infrastructure, no destination address validation against a whitelist, is a textbook example of the security shortcuts that competitive pressure incentivizes. And it underscores a mechanical reality. Supply chain attacks require no direct breach of the target. The entry point is a trusted third party, a contractor, a developer with legitimate access. The theft occurs inside the trust boundary, where most security monitoring isn't looking. But direct hacks are only one vector. The second is harder to detect, and in the long run, more structurally damaging. Since at least 2023, North Korean state actors have been operating inside Western technology companies, not as external hackers, as employees. The operation is known in the intelligence community as wage mole, linked to a subgroup of Lazarus Group called Famous Cholima, and it works like this. An operative purchases stolen identity documents from a criminal marketplace. They build a fabricated LinkedIn profile, a US university degree, a plausible employment history, references from real companies loaded into a criminal database that passes standard background checks. They apply for remote positions, specifically targeting Web3 startups, DeFi protocols, and crypto exchanges. In the video interview, they present through a US residential IP address, routed through a proxy network, on a laptop physically located in America, but operated remotely from North Korea. A collaborator manages the hardware. The operative manages the performance. They get hired. Once inside, the objective isn't always immediate theft.
Sometimes it's access accumulation over months. GitHub repositories, AWS credentials, smart contract deployment keys, private key management systems. The operative works normally, commits code, attends stand-ups, and waits. On January 16, 2025, a U.S. Treasury sanctions announcement identified one such network. The forensic breakthrough came from blockchain analysis. An investigator traced salary payments from a legitimate company's payroll to a Lazarus Group controlled wallet. Behavioral anomalies, time zone inconsistencies in code commit timestamps, writing patterns in comments that didn't match a native English speaker confirmed what the on-chain data suggested. Remote work culture eliminated in-person verification. Hiring velocity at startups made deep vetting economically irrational. Standard security tooling monitors external threats, not legitimate employees with privileged access. Every structural feature of modern tech hiring made this operation easier to run. Stealing the funds is only half the problem. The other half is turning them into something the regime can actually spend. Blockchain transactions are pseudonymous, not anonymous. Every movement of stolen funds is permanently recorded on a public ledger. Chainalysis, TRM labs, and government forensics units are watching. The challenge for North Korea isn't just stealing, it's laundering at a scale that outpaces investigation. The architecture they use for this is called multi-hop laundering, and it exploits a specific technical vulnerability in how cross-chain infrastructure works. The sequence goes like this. Stolen Ether, or BTC, is swapped through a decentralized exchange to USDT, a dollar-pegged stablecoin. That USDT is bridged from Ethereum to the Tron network. On Tron, it moves through a series of intermediate wallets, sometimes passing through a mixing protocol that generates zero-knowledge cryptographic proofs to mathematically sever the transaction trail. Eventually, it lands at an over-the-counter broker, typically operating through a Chinese-language Telegram channel, where it is exchanged for fiat currency, Chinese yuan or North Korean won. That entire sequence, on-chain, takes under 10 minutes. The reason Tron specifically sits at the center of this pipeline is not ideological, it's operational. Transactions on Tron cost roughly $1. Transactions on Ethereum cost $10 to $50. Tron settles in 3 to 5 seconds. Most small OTC brokers, especially in China, where the bulk of the cash-out activity runs, only accept USDT on Tron. The laundering pipeline didn't choose Tron because it was clever. It chose Tron because the fees and liquidity made it the only economically viable rail for high-volume conversion. In 2025, Chinese-language OTC networks processed an estimated $16.1 billion in illicit crypto. That's $44 million per day. Huion Gateway, a payment processor in Cambodia with documented links to the country's ruling family, recorded a 1,400x surge in transfer volume tied to laundered crypto from South Korea alone, reaching $8.9 million in a single year. Garantex, a Russian-aligned exchange sanctioned in March 2025, processed over $100 million in illicit funds before it morphed into a decentralized system that couldn't be seized. These intermediaries charge between 5% and 20% for their services. At $16 billion in annual volume, those fees represent over $1 billion in revenue for the laundering layer alone. Tether, which issues USDT, can blacklist wallet addresses, but blacklisting only prevents future use of that specific address. It doesn't reverse transactions that have already settled. It doesn't recover funds that have already been converted to cash. By the time a blacklisting order is executed, the funds have already moved 3 hops down the chain. And by the time a cross-border legal cooperation mechanism could produce an asset freeze order, a process that takes months, sometimes years, the cash has long since entered the traditional banking system of a jurisdiction with no extradition treaty and no interest in cooperating. On-chain, the entire operation takes minutes. Off-chain, the legal response takes years. This is the point where the story stops being about cryptocurrency. The world built a sanctions architecture designed for the 20th century. It assumed that controlling physical trade routes and correspondent banking access was sufficient to strangle a rogue state's access to hard currency. That assumption held for decades because the global financial system ran entirely through centralized institutions, ports, banks, SWIFT, that could be pressured, regulated, and closed. Cryptocurrency broke that assumption not through malice, but through design. A peer-to-peer settlement network that requires no correspondent bank, no clearinghouse, and no physical logistics infrastructure is immune, by construction, to the specific choke points the sanction system was built around. North Korea didn't find a loophole in the rules. It found a gap between two different eras of financial infrastructure and built an entire industry inside it. And then every other actor in the system made a rational choice that made the gap wider. DeFi protocols rush to market because being late to TVL accumulation is more expensive than the expected cost of being exploited. Laundering intermediaries set up shop in jurisdictions where no enforcement mechanism could reach them, charging 10% on every billion that passed through. The Lazarus Group trained an army of engineers, placed them inside target companies, and ran IT worker operations that generated revenue even before a single hack occurred. None of these actors are irrational. None of them are miscalculating. They are each responding correctly to the incentive structure in front of them. The UN's Multilateral Sanctions Monitoring Team now estimates that crypto theft funds up to 50% of North Korea's WMD and ballistic missile financing. That number is not a side effect of a broken system. It is the output of 3 interlocking incentive loops, each one reinforcing the others, running without friction, with no single exit point available to any actor without catastrophic economic loss. By the time you're reading a headline about a $1.5 billion hack, the money is already gone. The bridges have been crossed, the mixers have run, the OTC desk has settled, and somewhere in the laundering pipeline, a 10% fee has been collected by someone operating in a jurisdiction that will never answer a subpoena. North Korea stole 60% of the world's crypto in 2025. Not because its hackers are uniquely brilliant, though the technical sophistication is real. Because 3 systems, each broken in its own way, lined up perfectly. The sanctions gap, the speed to market trap, the jurisdictional dead zone. The gap is still open, and the math, for the people on the other side of it, still works. I'll be doing a deep dive into how North Korea infiltrated the tech industry in my next video. If that's something that interests you, hit the subscribe button. Let's go.